For those of you who don't know me or haven't met me, since 2005, I've been working in higher ed. I was a faculty member for almost 10 years. I'm a licensed and trained speech pathologist and taught both clinical and didactic courses. Then I moved on into administration, as many of us do, and worked in institutional effectiveness and institutional research for the next 10 years. But now I'm considering this the second half of my higher ed career, and I'm at Mentor Collective, where I am on the product team, but participate very highly in the research conversations with campuses and often sales conversations as well. So some of you may have heard my voice before, may have seen my face before. That might be why, but know that I work on the product team now. There is a variety of there is a variety of folks on the call today. Many are partners, and we encourage you in your introductions in the chat when you say where you're from and who you are, to engage with each other in questions if you want to talk, if you want to connect. But there are new campuses and new folks on the call as well. So I want to give just this slide's worth of explanation of what Mentor Collective is. We are a combination of services, technology, and research to help facilitate successful peer relationships through peer mentorship on your campus. We do have some programs that are with alumni, which we also consider near peers. We have some special programs, but mostly we focus on the relationships between peers, students and their student peers. The services component provides consultation, provides a connection to that collective of all of the great mentorship practice that we have at Mentor Collective. The technology portion, which I'll reference a little bit today, helps facilitate everything we're doing and make sure that we have the data in real time and we're making things as smooth as possible for everyone involved. And the research component involves research into mentorship in general, but also research into our programs, into the work we do so that we can get better, both on campus and at Mentor Collective. And because of that research, I can highlight some of the data today, and that's what I'm going to go through. So again, I encourage you, raise your hand or give as many shout outs and responses as you'd like. How these things come together, how we help campuses. We want to engage students authentically, right? We don't want to just have a generic program that makes students feel like a number rather than the authentic human being they are and the way they want to connect. We want to make sure you as campus have the insights you need to help students be successful. We're going to talk a lot about student success today. We know that on campus, you have a student success strategy. You have all these programs in place. You have a plan. You have pathways that you want students to go down. And we want to make sure that we are enhancing that or supplementing that and not taking the place of it in any way. And then, of course, we want to be as efficient as possible. So we want to make sure that the resources that you have on campus are optimized in any way they can be. Here's how we do it. In order to get data, you have to have an assessment framework in place. I don't know if you heard me in my introduction say that I had 10 years in institutional effectiveness and institutional research. You will, if you did, you will know that that makes me insist on having outcomes for our programs, right? We need to know what we're going for if we're going to measure it appropriately. And some of those things that we measure and that we can provide for campuses are concerns and topics that are coming up between and among the peers so that you can plan your student success strategy around it. We focus on non-cognitive items. We focus on student behaviors. We will work with you to do analysis based on the timing and the goals of your program. And we want to connect students as relevantly as possible and make sure those programs are efficient. For those of you who don't know, here's how the data comes in. The title of this presentation was Student Voice, and that means that student perceptions, student identities, the way students identify themselves are very important to what we do, and that starts with the matching survey. This is student-provided data about who they are and the experiences they've had, and this is how we can authentically communicate or connect them with peers. And it also provides data so that you can start to see what groups of students certain programs are working for and for whom they're not working, and we can make improvements or make changes. There's also pulse surveys or micro surveys. This is where you can ask questions in a timely manner. Things come up on campus, right? Each of your campuses has a different timeline than everyone else's. And sometimes you just want to know or get a pulse check on what students are thinking. We can administer quick micro surveys through the through the Mentor Collective platform. And again, this is the student voice. This is students telling us what their concern is right now. There's also the ability to take in information each time peers get together. So it's very easy using a mobile device or a computer if you don't have a mobile device to indicate how peers are communicating. We got together in person. We talked about changing majors. This is something that they would like help with, right? This is the type of information that comes in. Again, it's student voice, both the mentors and the mentees providing this information whenever possible. So that's just some of the ways our information or the data comes in that you can use on your campus. For some reason, my slide advancing clicker is not working today, so excuse my hesitation. For those of you assessment-minded folks on the call, or if you're just interested, there are basically 3 buckets of assessment we do where we use this information in addition to the formal assessments. One is a satisfaction score. That ability to log information also asks mentors and mentees what they think about the program. That matters to us at Mentor Collective. We're not into making any of your students upset or have a bad experience, so we are constantly monitoring that and always asking for that information. More importantly for you all on campus, there's engagement information. Engagement in the form of who's signing up. How many are the people that you're targeting a mentorship program to actually saying yes to the program? And if they're not, who are they? Because that might mean they need some sort of other intervention. We keep track of the conversations that are logged. We'll talk about flags in a minute. Those get recorded. And we also, in as easy as possible way, show you for a change from week to week so you can monitor trends and engagement. So it's not just that we set up a program for you and let you go. We actually nudge and encourage the program throughout the cycle that you as a campus set. Again, depending on the timing of the program, you might be interested in a MELT. You might be interested in how students are feeling about belonging on campus or their mindset around their academic success. Or you might be looking at persistence on an individual or group level, how many students are retained. We have a formal survey structure in place to help nudge and find that information, but also work with you to do the analysis at the end if you want to know if there's an impact on those different elements. So let's talk about some data around authentically engaging students. This is 2022 data. We've been around a long time. And if you saw on the first slide, I'm looking for those with a keen eye, we have almost 200,000 mentorships that have either active or have gone through the Mentor Collective programming. But just in the last year, we've had almost 9,000 mentorships, unique participants, and that's 9,000 people. And notice almost 30,000 flags about those people. Flags are actionable things that we as a campus or we as Mentor Collective can respond to and make sure that students are getting the support. I mentioned with the matching survey, we ask questions from potential mentees and mentors, how they identify where their affinities lie and what their experiences are. So you're going to see information broken down into the traditional buckets or the traditional demographic groups. We have 2-year students, we have 4-year students, we have graduate students, all who are successfully participating in Mentor Collective programs. We help students identify based on their gender identity, by their race and ethnicity identification. Then we get into other elements as well that are equally important. Who's an adult and who's a historically traditional age? I'm saying historically traditional age because more and more the 18-year-old isn't necessarily the main student on campus anymore. We ask students, or we connect students who are parents. We connect students who are caregivers. Of course, we pay attention to first-generation students. And there are also other elements that might be important to your campus. I know for sure we talk about this with the community and technical colleges. Who are the stop-out students who need a little nudge to come back and would like to connect with someone who has experienced that? If you are new, I will tell you that Mentor Collective provides this data in a partner dashboard. If you're a partner, you know this, you've seen this. But the data about students broken down into these groups, their engagement, their satisfaction, this shows up on the dashboard that you have access to at all times, and you can identify several people on campus who should have access to this information. The data is also exportable so that you can put it into your other systems if you need to. In addition to engagement data, we have flag data and participation. And then because we have that services team, you're going to have real honest to God human conversations with people to go through your data about what it means and maybe get some insights into what other campuses in the collective are doing so that you can use that information to make decisions as well. We do know that each campus is unique, and there are some ways that we may show data on the dashboard that isn't exactly what you want. Maybe you have scholarship students, or you want to pay attention to a specific group of students. You can also import from your student information system institution-provided data that will, again, in the dashboard, filter data down into the groups that you want to see or that you need to pay attention to. That means if you have multiple small mentorship programs on your campus, you can still manage those in one place because you can separate those groups' data out and be able to see that in the way you need to. This is an example from our partner at Riverside, where they look at students who are first-time or first-year students and transfer students. I have a colleague who had the best quote ever about transfer students who said they have less time to feel connected to campus. We need to pay special attention to them right away. That's why transfer programs are very often a highly utilized program among our partners. So what are some of the data that come through? I mentioned that mentors can identify flags. They can raise flags about their mentees. Mentees can raise flags about themselves as well. And this may or may not be shocking to you, right? Academic struggles are going to show up very often. Again, this is our 2022 data. That's a very common flag that comes up, as are financial concerns. And you all have programs on campus that are ready and waiting for students to help support those in those different areas. Switching majors was also a top flag. And here's one of the reasons I want to point out that using Mentor Collective for a mentorship program is powerful. Most often when campuses are running their own programs, they will often align students or match students based on major, not affinity and identity and experience the way we do. We can include major, but a lot of students switch majors. I'm quite honestly quite surprised that it's only 7% in the past year. Students switch majors at a far higher rate than that. I see some smiles, so I think people are agreeing with me. You can keep track of these, and we can rematch students if we need to as well. One of the things I want to point out is the other flag, right? We don't want to dictate exactly what's important to your students or limit the ways that flags can be raised for students. And I think that's why other shows up so often. There's a place to put the qualitative information around a flag that isn't mentioned as other. And I want to draw your eye to the last bullet point. Yvette, who is your host of the show, and Shannon, who is talking right now, will both tell you that we have skipped class because we couldn't find parking. Sorry for telling your story, Yvette, but it's true. It's a big deal. And a student probably isn't going to walk up to their faculty member and say, I can't find parking. They might not know who to ask of staff where to find parking. But when a peer is connected with them and a peer says, oh yeah, it's difficult. Here's the best lot. Here's how to get a pass. Here's some strategies for you. That can really make a difference in just whether students show up or not. And they have to show up to be successful. So I don't like to discount those kind of flags because they're very important in the life of a student. Over the past year and a half, I worked very closely with the community and technical colleges. I've worked with all campuses, but I've paid specific attention to the two-year institutions. And the data that's coming through in the two-year institutions is very similar to what data exists outside Mentor Collective. Financial need is always an issue. It's an issue with a lot of students, but it typically tends to be an issue at the two-year institutions. I also want to point out that nearly 30% of the mentees are adults. As important as financial need, which we talk about a lot, is our mental health, mental well-being. And if you think about the combination of mental health and mental well-being being important, and the fact that many of these students are adults, it's one thing to be an 18-year-old transitioning into higher ed and having some anxiety about something you don't know about, especially if you're first generation and no one in your family can tell you about it. It's a completely different thing to have mental need support mentally and emotionally when you're an adult and you have children at home or someone you're caring for. Because because people are matched with peers and they can share that experience and that affinity, they can be directed to the services that exist for them in a more specific way than if we just said mental health concerns in general. So I just wanted to make sure that we think about the nuances that can be involved when you're running a program the way we do. Dr. Troy, she is a huge advocate for us. She's a great partner and likes to use this example as a really important flag that came up at her institution. We don't know, again, if what students are facing, and they are more likely to tell peers or more comfortable in telling peers about this. Let me be very clear, we prepare the mentors, but they are not prepared to be the student's success strategy on campus, right? They're a conduit for all of the other services you have on campus. And that's why I want to highlight these items right here. What mentors do and what mentees learn in a Mentor Collective program. Among the many things that happen are mentors will suggest resources and normalize asking for help. That is the power of a peer, and that's what peers can do for students. Mentees will learn how to locate resources on campus and know where to go for help. And I realize I'm watching the clock, Alex. I will keep us on time. We're getting towards the end. We do actually have data. Yvette is a fantastic host. She filled in for Vanessa, who wasn't feeling well today, but Vanessa is highlighted on this article here. The New Mexico Mentoring Institute, the journal, in partnership with North Carolina and Greensboro, they actually ask students directly, did you use our campus resources more often as a result of this mentorship program? And they did. So when we say we're supercharging your student success strategy and we're supplementing all of these great programs you have, we're getting students to the offices that are there to help them. Very quickly, I'm going to jam through these so that we can get to the panelists. There are non-cognitive factors that are included in the efficacy assessment that we do. I want you to think about this quote that came from the SAC-COC conference I just attended. Students who have the means, but maybe not the readiness for the academics, have the same retention rates as students who may be low income but have high achievement. How do you help students who have the same, how do you move your retention rate if there's these two completely different buckets of students? Who do you focus on? Who do you give your resources to? I want to, like I said, very quickly go through these. If a student feels like they're confident, they're going to stay in their class. If a student knows how to find support for their academic struggles, they're probably going to finish the course more successfully. And if they know how to navigate and they know help is in place, they're going to stay in their programs. That is someone who needs academic help, and has the means to stay there. On the other hand, a lot of students who are maybe first generation or have reasons that they might not feel like they belong. If they feel like they matter at school, if they see themselves on campus, if they know how to contribute, they're more likely to stick around. This is self-efficacy, academic self-efficacy, which is associated with academic performance, and this is sense of belonging, which is associated with retention. A sense of community and having a mindset that you can handle the academic work helps stay on campus, helps both students be successful and be retained. And we have that data because we collect information through our formal assessment. We can tell you in general how students are feeling about their courses and about their belonging, and specifically who they are. If you've tuned me out, come back for just this second. Coming soon, one of the next things we're releasing on the dashboard is letting the folks on campus know exactly how many people are considered low or in academic self-efficacy or sense of belonging. You are going to have this alert. You're going to know that it's time to intervene with students, and you can go to the individual student's profile and actually see that data so that you can intervene with them one-on-one. So you don't have to cast a wide net and hope that you hit the person that needs that help. You can actually know who is saying that. And that's how we change retention, and that's how we close equity gaps in retention. By making sure that your staff knows exactly who to go to and how who to work with to make a difference for students on campus. So in general, if you take nothing away from this, know that Mentor Collective is both the source of data that you need to act and an intervention, not just the source and not just an intervention. And all of the wonderful stories and the way that happens are going to come from our panelists now. So I'm very happy to stop talking, but also very happy to answer questions in the chat should you have them. Thanks, everybody. Oh, but I'm supposed to introduce Polly. She's our moderator. You've already, you may or may not have seen her picture, but Polly Goss is the director at Mentor Collective, and she is going to formally introduce all our panelists and then facilitate a great discussion among them. So take it away, Polly.
Thanks very much, Shannon. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm joining from London, so it's getting towards our evening. Very excited to be here and for this discussion and to hear from our esteemed panelists on how they're thinking about retention, sense of belonging, student voice, and some of those themes that Shannon touched on in her presentation there. So I'd like to start with introductions from the panelists themselves, and I will ask Maria to go first.
Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you. My name is Dr. Maria Kuzo. I serve as the Provost and Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at the University of Wisconsin Superior in Superior, Wisconsin, right on the tip of the Great Lakes Superior. We are one of 13 of the UWs across the state of Wisconsin in the comprehensive category, and we rest at right around 2,300 total students at our institution.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Kyle Barron. I'm Vice President of Student Services at Jackson State Community College. We are located in between Memphis and Nashville, right dead smack in the middle. We have about 3,500 students that come to us. I would consider us to be budget conscious. I think that's important from a community college perspective. And then also about a third of our students are dual enrollment and half of our students are online. So some things that I think are important for a conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you may be in. I'm Catherine Kantarjev. I'm Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at California State University at Monterey Bay. We are one of 23 campuses. Unlike many systems, we are 23 very diverse campuses, regional comprehensives that serve very unique demographic areas through a large state of California. Monterey Bay is actually exactly halfway between the border with Oregon and then border with Mexico. So we truly are right in the middle. I've been in the system 34 years. I've served on 4 different campuses. So my lens to student success comes from being a faculty member, a chair, a dean, and now a provost. And we are a Hispanic serving and minority serving institution.
Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Ostendorf. I am the Dean of Admissions at Malloy University. We are a small private Catholic institution on Long Island. We serve about 6,000 undergrads and graduate students alike. Long Island being a very diverse area, our population on our campus matches the Long Island demographic. So we are seeing increases in students of color, especially students of Hispanic descent. And we're about 50% white, 50% students of color at this point. Malloy is made up of 4 very distinct schools. We're known for our nursing program and our health sciences, as well as our education program. We've got a very strong business program. Then we have the liberal arts that really just bolster up, liberal arts and sciences that bolster up every program that we have on campus. I've been in higher education now for a little over 20 years. I've served in student affairs, enrollment. I've even spent a couple of years running higher education verticals at 2 different marketing agencies. And so I just love working with these students.
Thank you very much. And we recommend to switch to speaker view as the best way to view the panel. And that will, if you adjust that view to speaker view, it will make it easier. And thank you very much to all the panelists. And I will kick us off with our first question. And this is for Maria. So, you know, thinking about why we're here, student voice, student centeredness, in a recent conversation that you had with our CEO, Jackson Boyer, you mentioned, Maria, that institutionalizing student centeredness requires a big leap. And I was hoping that you'd be able to share more about that. And in particular, what is the role of student voice in helping you address the top challenges that your institution faces regarding student success?
Thanks, Polly. I really did have a delightful conversation that day, and it caused me to think deeper about this concept of how do we get to genuine and authentic student-centeredness. So in my experience with this over the last decade on our campus, the whole movement of student success, student-centeredness really started to emerge about 10 years ago as a concept, and it was being brought from outside experts and from our student affairs professionals who had long held that as a key principle. Now, being one of the smallest of the comprehensives within the UW-Wisconsin constellation, our campus always had the benefit of being close to our students by size alone. So the concept was introduced and people quickly appropriated it, but in truth, it was just somewhat of an empty vessel. It represented practices that people already claimed, but was not very well defined. Within this last decade, through various strategic plans and a number of other initiatives that we introduced on the campus, we then adopted formally the lingo. And so that showed up in 2 strategic plans and a number of other initiatives around EDI and student success on the campus. That's one step further along the continuum. Now we're in a phase working on integrated practice. And what that means is trying to get the entire campus to see that student success really is everyone's job, although everyone does a different job when it comes to actually implementing that. And we are doing that by way of really trying to turn, this is my chancellor's metaphor, and I thought it was brilliant. We're really trying to turn a beautiful bag of marbles into a string of pearls. Bag of marbles, string of pearls. So what I mean by that is that on most of our campuses, and certainly mine, we have centers, we have places for students to go to get help, but they operate as singular, beautiful marbles. They are not necessarily intentionally integrated with each other, and they are not connected in a clear pathway where students can find them. That's part of the attractiveness of Mentor Collective, is students can help students find the marble that may suit their need. And what we're trying to move toward, though, is a fully integrated practice where we have a string of pearls. Each of those marbles turns into something that is tied to something else in a very intentional order, making it very easy for a student to enter a pipeline at any point across that string of pearls. And that is what is leading us to the final step, which is culture change. It's amazing to me on our campus how still, after all this decade of work in one variety or level or another, it still takes 20 minutes in any given meeting of faculty or staff or administrators to actually get around to talking about students. That represents the critical leap that I think we all need to work on, is the culture change, where the very first question that gets asked in any conversation is what is the impact and contribution of this topic to our students? And we're working very hard in establishing that culture right now. So where do the students come in? I think you have to have a vibrant relationship with shared governance with the student government associations as a constant conduit. I think you need to have regular meetings with students outside of the formality of things, especially as administrators, in order to ask for feedback. For example, I've got 12 what I call belonging sessions coming up over noon hours this semester, where it's me and the dean meeting with a random group of students with a course cake copy and things like that, in order to just visit and find out more on the ground. And we see peer mentoring, such as Mentor Collective, fitting in as the third way to make sure that the student voice is heard. And as our program grows in our campus, I intend to consult with that group more frequently to get their input on what they are hearing on the ground from their student colleagues and mentees in order to keep grounded. And so for me, the big leap is, how do you turn it into a culture? And then how do you ground that culture so that that becomes truly the central commitment of a university?
Thank you, Maria. That is really illuminating. I think a few themes there. I saw lots of nodding heads. And I think that image of taking those beautiful individual marbles, those one-off student success interventions, and then how can an institution and institutional leaders like yourself think about stringing them into that pearl necklace, making sure that students have a way to be really connected on campus and the whole institution to be connected around the idea of supporting students is very powerful. And I want to turn this to Kyle now and kind of bring in the perspective from a two-year institution. What does capturing student voice look like at your institution? And how do you ensure that you're not missing that silent student, the student that doesn't speak out when they are in need of support?
Thanks, Polly. Yeah, so for us, like most institutions, we're going to use our SESI and our sense data to kind of guide a lot of the things that we do in a strategic plan level. But at a two-year college, that lagging data, that student's already graduated by the time you get it back. And so that's something that we often want to be real cognizant of. And so when we have activities on campus, we're going to do micro surveys after the activity and find out what was the takeaway from the individual and how did they like that event? How does that inform what we do for future events? And then additionally to Maria's point, we also have peer mentoring. We're not associated with Mentor Collective. We've got our own in-house model, but it is something that we rely heavily on those peer mentors to provide that representation for our students. We try and make sure whenever we hire our peer mentors, we hire a diverse group of peer mentors from across not just our main campus, but we have 4 different campuses, and we have online courses. And like I said, half of our students now are online. And so trying to ensure that even though the online student who really, for us, we really don't hear very much from unless something's gone wrong. We encourage our peer mentors to reach out to them, to connect with them, to communicate via text, and to relay that information to us, raising the flags, much like the Mentor Collective model does, to provide that area of focus and opportunity where we can target our efforts as best as we can. And so those are some of the ways that we really try to make sure that we don't just do what we've always done or take what the SESI and sense gives us, because it is lagging, incredibly lagging. But how do we get to a point in which we can be responsive quicker, and then also using those peer mentors to be leading even and say, hey, what does it look like if we do this? What are y'all's thoughts on this? Before we go in this direction, how do you feel about this? You know, because as a cost-conscious institution, we only have so many opportunities to be able to invest in student success. And if they don't work, we have to do it quickly, fail fast, and move to the next one. Or if it does work, we have to figure that out and then reinvest, and try and really push the student success from that particular perspective. And so peer mentoring has done that for us here at Jackson State.
Thank you, Carl. That is really interesting and insightful to hear about how at Jackson State you're using those peer mentors to drive change, as well as kind of being a vehicle to learn from students about what challenges they're facing. And I want to, you know, turn the conversation a little bit now, thinking about the role of academic leadership within the student success strategy. And Catherine, I love to hear from your perspective in the role of the provost at Cal State Monterey Bay. You know, that role we know nationwide of a provost has expanded from what was historically a purely academic role into now, as Maria touched upon earlier, something that is really thinking about the whole student well-being and about that student success journey as a whole. And, you know, from the scope of your role, I'm curious how much attention, you know, have you had to pay to leveraging student voice to inform your student success and retention strategy?
So thank you for the question, Polly. I'm going to answer it also giving the backdrop in which I operate as provost, to give that context to the audience. In the Cal State system, we have a graduation initiative 2025, with many in the audience may be familiar with, but the initiative is our determined effort to ensure that all students, regardless of their ethnicity, race, or financial background, have an equal opportunity to earn a college degree from the CSU. And due in part to that initiative having a heavy emphasis on equity, graduation rates in the CSU are at record highs. And I'm pleased to say that this last year, Monterey Bay led the system in meeting or exceeding its GI 2025 goals. For students to succeed academically, socially, economically, and I use those 3 words because student success embodies all of those things, both pre and post graduation. Retention is key to this initiative. And as Maria said, retention is everybody's responsibility at the university. At CSU Monterey Bay, our efforts are coordinated jointly by academic affairs and student affairs. So the two vice presidents regularly convene a steering committee that sets the priorities for the year to meet the GI 2025 goals. And our partnership with Mentor Collective is an outgrowth of some of that work. Our brand, just to let you know, of GI 2025 on our campus is called Otter Promise, because we're the otters and we otterize everything. So we support each otter. But notice the word promise. That's the asset model, not the deficit model. We don't view students as being at risk. We view them as having promise. And our efforts are, as you might imagine, data informed and mission driven. We have dashboards that monitor indicators. And I encourage those in the audience today to explore the GI 2025 dashboards at calstate.edu. But I want to paraphrase a colleague of mine at the Chancellor's Office, Jeff Gold, who's largely responsible for the evolution and revision of those dashboards. In a recent presentation at AAC&U, he said every data point is a student and every student has a story. And it's about student stories and student success. They're not just numbers. Just to tell you a little more about our campus, to put this in perspective, we have about 6,300 undergraduates. 31% of them are underrepresented, including Black, Hispanic, or American Indian. 24% of our students are both underrepresented and first generation, and 6% are first gen only. So collectively, that group of three categories represents 61% of our students. And we're 52% Hispanic, 3% Black, 6.5% Asian, and 14% other. So that's the demographic of many of the CSU campuses. And in addition to providing robust academic student supports in academic affairs, such as intentional advising, as well as supplemental instruction, we introduced the peer-to-peer mentoring with Mentor Collective, which, as I said, we call Otter Collective. And we began first with Pell-eligible first-time first-year students in 2021, allowing them to opt in. And we used this as a recruiting tool at our Admitted Otter Day in the spring of 2021. And then in 2022, we extended this opportunity to all first-time first-year students. And we are now beginning to track the cohorts, and we're seeing the impacts on retention. And I believe I'll have an opportunity to say more about this later with another question, so I won't dwell on it now. But one quick thing I also want to share with the audience, I would encourage you to thoughtfully consider how functionalities and processes on your campuses are aligned or perhaps not, with an eye on retention and student success. At Monterey Bay, we found, particularly during the pandemic and immediately after, that we had grown and we had grown very fast, but functions and processes that directly touch students had become diffuse. Sometimes they'd become disconnected, resulting in duplicated efforts and gaps, all of which were negatively impacting students. As one example, we discovered that although we're one of the smaller campuses in the system, we had one of the highest numbers of financial holds on students, which was preventing them from registering. So I encourage you to look at these. This has led us to re-examine parameters and timelines, as well as to restructure and reorganize to enable meeting our institutional priorities of retention and student success.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing those insights from Monterey Bay, and fantastic to hear about the successes that you've had in driving forward towards achieving those GI goals and around increasing student retention. And one, as a follow-up, you mentioned there about the partnership between academic affairs and student affairs, and how essential it is to have functions and processes in alignment to support student success. As a follow-up question, how do you see the role of the practitioner as related to the provost, and how have other facets of your institution supported you in moving forward this critical student success work?
So I think a good example of this is to tell you a little more about the structure of the Otter Promise initiative and the steering committee, because the steering committee is a think tank for us that's comprised of faculty, staff, and administrators from across both the divisions of academic affairs and student affairs, and includes, I will say, the mid-manager level, as well as the people on the ground who touch students on a daily basis. And so this steering committee seeds subcommittees each year that address the student success and retention priorities. And then these committees deliver at the end of each academic year a report of their findings and recommendations for implementation, which are shared with our entire campus community through the shared governance structures. So this next year, these turn into action plans for the campus with timelines and key milestones. And Otter Collective is one such implementation of a subcommittee that researched this, took the time to understand what we needed, and developed the timeline for the implementation and the execution. Other examples on our campus include projects to address equity gaps and DFW rates in critical courses, implementing a final assessment week schedule. We were a small campus and didn't have a formal schedule at the end of the semester, and also establishing widespread use of digital degree planners, which is now helping us meet course needs, keeping students on track. They can see the goalposts to their degree, and that's also helping with retention.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the Otter Collective has to be one of the partnership program names closest to my heart, as I have such a soft spot for otters. I want to thank people who put some comments in the chat and just say, please feel free to add questions and comments. We want this to be a discussion. And so just thank you. And now turning to Stephen, thinking from your lens in admissions and enrollment, I think everybody here has read the headlines. We know that there has been a decline in trust from some students and some of the American public in terms of the value of higher education. And how do you think that colleges can help to change that perception and to distinctly message their value to prospective students?
Thank you, Polly. I mean, value, the first thing you have to do is define it. We have to define what those values are. I mean, if I did a list of the schools in our area and the schools that I've looked at, we all have small classes. We all give out financial aid. We all have good student to teacher ratios, right? It's all this, a lot of what's being said is the same. A lot of what we seem to think that the value is the same. And what my challenge is that we start listening to the students, right? We've been talking about student voice throughout this whole process, but we need to listen to them about what is it that they're looking for? What is it that their parents are looking for, right? And we need to leave our egos out of it. I'll be honest. I started looking at colleges over 30 years ago. The difference between now and then it's exponentially different, right? I was looking at books. I was in a guidance counselor's office. The internet wasn't really a thing. I had a Commodore 64 and a Game Boy, right? That was the screens that I had. These students are inundated with information, and it's coming at them really fast. It's coming at them in many different ways, and they're savvier than we were, right? They're looking in different channels for different things. And so if we're going to be an institution that understands that what a student values is different from what a parent values, which is different from what a graduate student values, which is different than what a transfer student values, which is different from what a faculty member values, leadership values, admissions values, right? We've got to think and provide what people are looking for versus what we think we should be providing. And this is a hard thing to do. It's really hard to convince faculty sometimes that, yes, what you're teaching in that class is important, but maybe not at this stage, right? Maybe we don't have to put that in our lead marketing message. And so value comes from understanding the audience and doing the work to listen to the students, doing the work to listen to the parents, doing the work to listen to students who didn't come to your institution and why. And how do we try and turn around that reason for someone else the next year? So we want to tailor those messages and really try to speak to students where they are. When I speak to parents, I'm reaching out to them about, and we say value, right? But I'm talking about financial value, right? So what does the financial aid offer look like? What do we do? Are there internships and job prospects on the outside? And then what other values do we have? Like I'm happy to say that we have been voted the safest college in New York, right? And so that's a big deal for parents. Students don't really care about that so much, but parents do. And so tailoring your message around what they're looking for. For students, it comes down to how do we provide the conversation around fit, right? How can they see themselves on that college campus? And this is where Mentor Collective really comes in. Again, I went to school, I was looking at schools about 30 years ago. I don't know what the student experience is like. It's hard for me to say, having worked in higher education for over 20 years, that I don't know what the student experience is like. But I have to understand that, I have to accept that, and then I have to let my students do it for me. Right? You know, that's why we have Mentor Collective. That's why the Molloy Mentors exists. They are that bridge to that student experience. And those flags are so important. And we've seen how we saw how they progressed from, I want to know more about my financial aid, I want to know more about what's going on campus, to I want to know more about registration, as the time of that mentorship expanded and went along the timeline. And it was really cool to see, because that helped us tailor our messaging to the students from the admissions office. If that's what they're asking about when they're talking to their peers, let's mirror that conversation as we're talking to our students who are in the funnel and looking to come onto campus. And that makes it's really cool, right? It was really cool that we could be that responsive. We also have to think about all those different channels that didn't exist when I was looking for school, right? When I was looking for school, social media didn't exist, Google didn't exist. Like, those things they just weren't there. And so how do we speak to them in those channels? Really thinking about student voice is knowing that social media is going to be about fit and experience, but Google's probably going to be a little bit more about program, right? It's probably going to be, I want to find this program. And then TV, newspaper, if you're still using those are probably going to be more brand. How do we inspire them with who we are as an institution? Go from the broad, get to the specific. And then email kind of transcends both, right? We can do transactional as well as inspirational and aspirational. And I'm sorry, I brought my marketing mind out, so I apologize a little bit for that. But when it comes down to those values, we need to understand what the students are looking for and try and get those into our messaging.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think, what we're hearing there is the importance of listening to your students, as you said, doing the work to listen to your students, not just while they're at your institution, but way before, throughout that student life cycle, to ensure that when, if they come to your institution, then you're able to best serve them and ensure that it really is that best fit. And I'm turning to Maria here for the next question, but thinking back to something that also Catherine shared there about every data point is a student, and every student has a story. And from partnering with Mentor Collective, Maria, I wondered if you could share any of those actionable insights that you've gained, knowing that, how important those student stories are to student success, and how has that helped your overall institutional strategy around retention and student sense of belonging?
Yeah, and I'd just like to echo Stephen. That was such a great analysis of how difficult it is to understand today's students using yesterday's mentalities. And I do think that many of our institutions are really kind of bogged down in that a little bit, of trying to make the case that today's students have different wants and needs and different approaches for how they're going to approach college. And I just really appreciated that incisive analysis. Well, Mentor Collective came into our campus environment right in the smack dab early days of COVID. And so while we all heard about it in a very quick 5-minute way at a chancellor staff meeting, I confess to you that whole thing slid way under the radar because of the pressing demands of managing the COVID crisis. So it took me until late last year to actually come back to that through a very delightful conversation with Emily Barrett, I believe, who contacted me to talk about the program. So my first review of actual data for our institution really caught my eye in a number of ways. One of them is to find out much more about just the frequency of contact, conversations, text messages between these students, and seeing the growth of the amount of partnerships that were being formed between the mentor and the mentees. That to me represented an opportunity to do something which I've long believed, even in my old school view, that the best thing about a campus in many ways is belonging and finding relationship. I believe that's a key part to what's going on in the world today, as it always has been. And so I latched right onto that immediately. I also looked very carefully at the satisfaction rates of the mentees, and it appeared that in fact they were getting value out of those particular conversations. And that showed me the evidence that there's something going on here that probably would be helpful to retention. More recently, we had data on the early alerts and the categories that affirmed data we were getting from EAB Navigate and other programs that we are investing in at this point. So it provided cross data affirmation, which was very, very encouraging. And this year I received also an FYE program 30-day match rate diagram, which kind of really showed the peak and the trough evolution in these communications and where it is most important to reach out to students and when you really miss the boat for a particular cycle. That got my attention because our campus is actively looking at things like first year experience and a number of other things to expand into. So all in all, I was very impressed with just the amount of data and analysis that is available through Mentor Collective. Now, I did not know about the dashboard and what that might bring to us. So that to me is new information that I have to go back to my team now and ask them about as to how we can use that to, again, cross-check and collate between other sources of information that we are getting on the campus. So net for me, I am seeing that string of pearls start to emerge here about how efforts with peers and peer collectives can feed into decisions about which kinds of other programs we need to invest in or stop investing in, to be honest, to create that seamless experience for students. And I have very much appreciated those kinds of things. They are actionable, they are practical, and they are leading to, you know, true changes or honing in on different things that we could have done 3 years ago.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing that. And I think one theme that is coming out from across everybody's answers here is about the importance of an integrated student success strategy, right from admissions through to enrollment, throughout the time that students are studying at the institution. And I want to turn to Kyle and to the 2-year perspective again, but also thinking about life beyond studying for a program, a certificate, whatever it may be, and you know how to expand the awareness for students at 2-year institutions of in-demand opportunities, and you know how do you ensure that students are on the right path to secure those opportunities once they finish the qualification that they started out at your institution?
So I think that this one is important to listen to your partners. And in this situation at the community college, especially for us here locally, we've got Ford with a $5.6 billion investment locally that is changing our hemisphere. And because of that, it's causing us to think and do differently. Now, I would argue we probably should have been thinking and doing differently a little bit sooner, but we'll take whatever catalyst it is that causes it, right? So partnering with the employers who are going to be actually putting your students to work and finding out what are the curriculum that they need for not yesterday's manufacturing, but for the future of manufacturing, or not yesterday's insert CIT business, whatever the field is, but finding out what the employers actually need and staying in regular communication and connection with them. Once you figure out that from their perspective, then you get to talk to your other community partners. So for us, it's our American Job Center. And so we wanted to make sure, okay, we now know what kind of fields are locally needed that we can prepare for beyond just traditional transfer. But how do we partner with our American Job Center to find out, are we finding students on a pathway that meets their career interest and meets their aptitude? And so again, cost conscious, we're not using our dollars, we're using their resources in that partnership to administer a survey at the first of orientation and make sure we've got them on the right pathway. Now, once we got them on the right pathway, we changed the way that we are doing higher education or community college. And so this is part for us, our Tennessee Board of Regents in Tennessee has asked us to come up with a reimagining community college. And I saw some of the colleagues on here. We're one of 4 that received this grant across the state. So finding grant funding to do it was huge, but we are reimagining the experience and taking where we traditionally would have said, get your gen eds done and then we'll get into program. We're flipping that on its head and we're saying, go into program. From day one, get into program. We might take 1 or 2 gen eds along with it, but we want to get the student engaged in the course that they're actually coming for. As we were looking at our retention rate and our semester to semester success, we were losing students because we told them they had to take math right out the gate. And so whenever we get them right into the thing that they're wanting to do, if they want to be a CIT major, get them into a CIT class from day one. They can tolerate a little bit of math, sorry to the math majors, they can tolerate it on the side. And in addition, as long as they still have that thing that excites them, that energizes them, that causes them to want to push forward. And so getting that early impact has been huge for us as we've kind of worked through that. It's caused us to adjust who we are. We're in the early stages of this and it's taken some time. It's having to sit down and talk student services and academics and talk through that, and then bringing it to the students, our peer mentors, and saying, look, here's what we got. How crazy are we? Does this work? Because they're the ones who are doing it in orientation and helping the brand new students realize what that looks like. So that's been something that we've really benefited from. And then on top of that, we couldn't do it if it wasn't for grants. So being intentional in how we solicit grants, how we go for grants, how we make sure that we provide the right wraparound services and support for those students. If we don't have an unlimited budget, we got to do this one thing and do this one thing really well and make sure that we figure out if this is what is it or this is not. And if it is, great. And if it's not, then that's okay. And we're going to move to the next thing and try and knock that out of the park. So those have been some of the ways that we've tried to tackle that at the smaller community college level as we work through being great partners within community and industry, but also getting students into tracks that allow them to get a degree and go to work.
Thank you, Carl, for sharing that. I think that, some really tangible strategies that some other community college leaders might take away and think about for their campus as well. And I'd love, for people listening, if you have comments that you want to put in the chat, we welcome those comments and responses. If there are particular ways that you're harnessing student voice at your institution, love to hear about it. Or if you're having challenges hearing about what your students really need, there may be other people here who can help to shed some light on those challenges, and we'll have a chance in the small group discussions as well to dive deeper. So I want to turn to Catherine, and you mentioned some of the fantastic results that your campus has seen in terms of increasing retention rates, and spoke to how Otter Collective is one part of your much broader student success strategy. Our data has shown that first generation students in particular who participated in the Otter Collective were more likely to be retained from fall to fall. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit more to this group about why you think those authentic peer-to-peer conversations and the data that has been gathered through this program has helped to be such a critical intervention for those first generation students in particular, and also the Latinx students as part of that Otter Collective.
So again, with the backdrop of the demographic of students we serve, as you've noted, we've actually exceeded every benchmark that Mentor Collective has at Monterey Bay. We're only in our second year, and we're just beginning to analyze the data for impact on retention and graduation, and it's looking significant, and that's very encouraging and has moved us to continue expanding the program. We had 67% of the students invited to participate actually participate. They joined, they opted in, which is double the national benchmark for Mentor Collective. We have almost 700 students in the program now, and they've had over 10,000 text messages logged and almost 3,000 conversations logged. And I point that out because research shows that students in pairs that have logged more than 3 conversations are significantly more likely to persist in their education. And in our first year, 64% of our pairs logged more than 3 conversations. And in our second year so far, 53% of them have logged more than 3 conversations. Based on what we've observed among the conversations, and we don't moderate them, we just watch what's happening with these conversations. Among the conversations between the mentors and the mentees, the most frequent topics involve academics, student engagement, which means school life, activities, and getting to know each other. And the most frequent flags are academic struggles, financial concerns, and housing and food insecurities, which are often hidden from us. We don't know because students don't necessarily step forward and talk about that. So I point that out because these early alerts enable us through accommodation services, basic needs, or financial aid, for example, to provide just-in-time needed support to retain these students. Otherwise, they drop off the radar and we don't know why, and they don't necessarily respond because their attention is directed to other critical things. We're also planning to add the next cohort of first-time, first-year students to Otter Collective, as well as open it up to our incoming upper division transfer students, a different population, not residential. We are a highly residential campus. More than half our students live on campus, but our transfer students, for the most part, are commuters. And so having them engaged is very important. And we can track them within our dashboards to understand. We've now put attributes in our data system so that we can track the Otter Collective students in all of our GI 2025 dashboards as an additional filter, so we can really measure the impacts of Otter Collective on the retention rates of our students. And the last thing I want to say about our initiatives, which I want to highlight, is something that Shannon mentioned in her opening remarks, and that's the power to leverage student voice through strategic surveys. We're making some shifts this year because of enrollment challenges to optimize course offerings to meet student needs, number of seats, frequency, time slots, modality of courses. And because some of our curricula have some complexity because of requirements and options, and Kyle alluded to some of these issues around math. We are not quite at a level of compliance with our use of digital planners that we can reliably harvest course needs data out of the digital planners. So we're fortunate that we have an amazing institutional assessment and research team at CSU Monterey Bay. And we engaged students during the last 2 weeks of the fall 2022 semester in a brief survey about courses, unit loads, and modalities. Now, this was the last 2 weeks of the semester. There's a lot of things going on, including final assessments, capstones, and students are moving out of their dorm rooms at the end of that. But we had over 700 students respond, and they weren't given any additional incentives to respond. So they cared deeply about what we were asking them to weigh in on. The responses were collated, visualized in Tableau, and shared with the faculty. We learned why students were not carrying full loads, what the ideal balance of in-person and online would be for them, their preferences by class rank, college, and major, and what they would like offered in the summer session to keep them on track and retain them. And these are yet additional pieces of data that contribute to mission-driven decisions around retention and student success.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Catherine. And it's really exciting to hear about the work happening at your campus and the work that all of the panel have shared with us today in terms of how you can harness student voice. And we've heard how mentors, whether it's through Mentor Collective or not, can be a key part in providing a channel to gain authentic insights from students, but also to help drive change on campus as well. And you know, we've talked about this whole student journey, this student-centered journey around helping students from before they step foot on campus or log on virtually, right the way through to the path to graduation. And turning it to Stephen for our final question of the panel discussion.
Hey,
as an admission,
I hate to jump in. We have a question for Council before we close it out with Steve. I would love if RB would want to unmute themselves and ask Cal the question directly, or we can ask it for you. I wanted to make sure we caught that.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandria. So I have a question for Kyle, and sorry if I missed it. Are the peer mentors of your mentoring program students of your institutions? And if they are students of your institutions or institution, how do you navigate, or what challenges do you have when mentoring and complying with FERPA regulations or handling confidential student information, especially for those students who are struggling academically?
Great question. So our students at our college, they're also part-time employees. And so once they become part-time employees, they go through the FERPA training that we administer for all of our staff. We go really in depth on what you find out is for your students only, because they also get some access that other students don't have. And so we really try and hit hard on our FERPA training with them and let them know that when they get to a point, here is the person that you turn it to. And so we do not, to the point earlier, they are not the solution for everything. They are to point towards solutions. And so they don't know a lot about the individual outside, because we aren't using as robust of a system as Mentor Collective. I don't have bells and whistles. I have a list that they work off of. And so they don't have as much detail on it, but they are able to point them in the right direction whenever they get information that's provided from the student to them, as opposed to the other way around. But we do heavily push on our FERPA training. Great question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And if anyone else has questions for the panelists, please put them in the chat now, or we may even have a couple of minutes after. But I want to turn it back to Stephen and ask, as an admissions leader passionate about student success, your holistic enrollment management efforts take a panoramic approach to the student journey, from admissions through to graduation. So how can you share how we as people focused on student success within higher education, how can we go from just focusing on enrolling students to serving them? And what does this really look like in practice?
Absolutely, thank you. The big key, I think, on this comes down to something that every one of the panelists has spoken about already, and that's culture, right? We have to think about the culture of the institution. I hear too often that the students today are not college ready. That is a moving target. It is a goalpost we'll never catch. Who knows what college ready even means? The college itself needs to become student ready. We need to be prepared to serve our students, right? And my VP likes to say this: we teach the students we have, not the ones that we wish we had, right? And when I say teach, I want to use teach in the most broadest sense, right? As student affairs practitioners, we work with the student leaders we have, not the ones we wish we had, right? In admissions, we work with the applicants we have, not the ones the entire institution wishes we had, right? Right. And so if we're going to go from the idea of enrolling and hitting our numbers, to serving and saying, how are we helping these students go from day one to amazing representatives of our institution who are serving their communities, whether those are local, regional, state, national, or international. We've got to really think about the services we provide and how we connect them. And it's going to sound really simple, but we have to work together. Working on the same campus does not equal working together, right? We have to break down those silos. There are silos on every single campus. I have done a pretty good job of breaking down some, and I have completely failed at breaking down others. It's one of those things where you're just gonna, if you are committed to serving students, you're gonna hit your head against the wall more often than you're not. Eventually, though, you're gonna break through that wall. Might hurt a little, but you're gonna break through. And so, when I talk to colleagues, I always equate it to: have you ever been on the phone on hold, where you've talked to someone and you've been talking to someone for about 45 minutes, and then they're like, "Oh, I need to pass you on to someone else," and you have to retell that story again? How often do you want to be put on hold a third time? Well, that's the difference between coming in from admissions to your first year experience to getting into your major, right? You're constantly retelling, and these stopgaps become issues where students will start to stop out, or they'll start to get frustrated if they have to retell their financial aid story to a different financial aid counselor every time they go in there. So how do we connect the dots? How do we pull those stories together? How do we make sure that the student doesn't have to repeat themselves over and over and over again to get the services that they need, right? And that comes to really good communications between offices, really good systems, And being there and being the voice for the students. And sometimes the best voice for the student is another student. That's why we really like using Mentor Collective, because that really does help carry that story. I can't figure out how to get my story told to financial aid. And they talk to them, oh, let me talk to my financial aid counselor. I'll get you to the right person, right? I'll make sure you get that answer told, that answer. You know, I'm always late to class because I can never find parking. Oh, well, here, it's over here. This is where we can find the right parking lot. This is what we do. It's probably a good idea to show up 15 minutes early so you can search around a little bit, right? You know, my class and my practice schedule are always conflicting, or I feel like they're going to conflict based on the schedule they gave me. How do I get my schedule fixed? Oh, let me get you over to the Student Solution Center. Let me make sure the students know the answers. They've gone through it themselves. And so utilizing that student voice is how we serve the students better. But then as an institution, we have to listen. We have to listen to what those flags are. We have to listen to what our peer mentors and our Molloy mentors and our ambassadors and our students in the classroom are saying, and not just say, well, you know what, we've been here, we know how this works. We've always done it this way, and many students have graduated. It's absolutely fine. Now, we've got to be open to those kinds of changes, which is not easy, and that comes down to culture. It's servant leadership. It's picking people up as opposed to ruling from the top down. So that's my thought. Hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think you really eloquently hit on so many themes from throughout this panel discussion. I just want to thank all of the panelists for your contributions. We've heard some really important and inspiring, I think so, words there about making institutions student ready. That is the thought I want to kind of leave us all with. I think to Maria's point, how do we string those beautiful marbles into that pearl necklace? How do we gather data? How do we listen to students to make every institution student ready? Thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your experience and your thoughts and your expertise.